Is ChatGPT going to replace you? Are you in danger? Should you try something else? Calm down. We're going to discuss all of this subject in this video, so stay with me till the end and let's talk about it. Let's dive into it. What is app tech learning? And today we're going to talk about a very spoken subject. Well, I'll say that I'm a bit late because this topic it's being highlighted since I don't know long time ago, and only now at this moment I'm going to talk a little bit about it because I like this subject and I like to give you my opinion about it. But I'm not just give my opinion about that one. Let's together we are going to analyze the facts about, is ChatGPT going to replace embedded software developers? So before I leave it my opinion here, we are going to analyze together the facts. It means we need to analyze first what an embedded software engineers do on a daily basis and what I'm gonna say currently, because I don't know how to predict the future. I don't know how ChatGPT is going to be in 5 years, in 10 years, but currently in the present, what ChatGPT is, what can it actually do, and if it can really replace developers, in which parts can it replace, or can it replace like every task? So we're going to find out everything on this video. First, let's analyze all that an engineer do. What does that mean? I'm going to split the embedded software engineer activity in 4 main pillars, which are design, software, tests, and debug. Attention, disclaimer that test it might share some activities, some tasks with test engineers, but I'm going to leave it these 4 main tasks that embedded software engineer do. First thing, design. So the embedded software engineer also is responsible for designing the software he or she going to implement afterwards. But before implementing the software itself, it needs to design. Why? Because he needs to understand what he or she needs to implement. It can be a feature, it can be a protocol, it can be anything you might imagine. He needs to read lots of hardware documentation or some protocol, standard, etc., to gather information and build a project requirement to afterwards translate it into software itself. When he starts to design, he might want to think about how this feature or how this protocol might behave on the overall system. So what does that mean? It means that the embedded software engineer, when designing, he needs to implement some flowcharts, design the variables that you eventually need, share the resources. Is he going to need an operating systems, real-time operating systems, general purpose operating systems? So how the different blocks are connected, etc. So once he takes all this information into account, it's time to translate this design into software itself. So he will take these requirements, all these projects, the variable definitions, the flowcharts, everything, data flows, and he will translate it into the software itself that will afterwards deliver it to production. So when implementing the software itself, there is many ways to learn the software. The software is a tool. So the ways you have to implement the software, it is the programming language. So as you might know, there is not for the context of embedded software, but you still have some options to use when implementing embedded systems that can use different programming languages. For example, C, C++, Rust, etc. The list goes on. So once the engineer took his design and translated it to software itself, the design, I mean the project requirements, variable data flows, etc., etc. It translated everything into software, in a software to be delivered to production. But before delivering software to production, he needs what? To validate what what does that mean, validate your software? As you might know, it means testing your software. It means creating tools, a variety of test techniques that allow the software engineer or embedded software engineer to validate the software he implements. So there is many ways to, or many tools to validate your software. That this is topic for another video, but you can do unit testing, integration testing, regression, system testing, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on. Once you finish your testing, all those testing I mentioned before, so you should be ready to production, right? No, because probably when you're testing your software, you're going to find bugs. This is a pretty normal fact that happens to every embedded software engineer, or to any not embedded, but any software, general software engineer. When you find those bugs, what you need to do, the next step is debugging. So you're going to, once you debug your code, it should be ready to production, deliver to production. Actually, not exactly, but I'm going to simplify all the process so it can be easier to understand. Anyway, so you take the bug you found and you're going to apply debugging technique, which there are many. But what I want to mention here, which is the more important thing, I guess, it is that you can have bugs from two different sources, I would say. So you can have software, you can encounter bugs on software and bugs on hardware. So for those two different bug sources, you have two different approaches to solve it. For example, when you find bugs in software, you might need to analyze the logs and find where is your code crashing, analyze the version control you are using, and analyze the commits that your software crashes, and which is the commit that it not crashed before, and compare the lines of code that you implemented that might be crashing the entire software. And you can also use some other tools, for example GDB, which is widely used on embedded systems to do a step-by-step approach for debugging. For example, analyzing the resistors on a runtime matter, etc., etc., etc. But when it comes to hardware issues, the story is different, because we are not anymore in a digital world. We are physical world, so it requires physical intervention. What does that mean? For example, when you have a hardware issue, you might want to verify that some pin is receiving signal or transmitting data, etc., etc. So how do you do that? You analyze the signal on oscilloscopes. You might want to use multimeters, etc., etc. So there are different tools to solve different bug issues that can be software or hardware. I think we made an overview about what an embedded software engineer does on a daily basis, from design until debug. Now let's talk about ChatGPT itself. So talking about ChatGPT, let's define first what is ChatGPT in simple terms, because I'm not an AI expert, so I'll not dive into details, but I'm going to cover the basics. So ChatGPT is a LLM, which stands for Large Language Model, which is based on the GPT-3 architecture and is capable of generating human-like text and can be used for a wide range of applications that includes programming, gaming, writing, searching. The list goes on. The possibilities are endless. So it contains a large database with more than billions of parameters. So it can be the more generic possible, so it can meet all possible requirements from humans in any area. It can be used even for translation, even for abbreviation. As I said, the possibilities are many. So based on that, you might imagine that it automated repetitive tasks, generating code that can help us. I'll show you that yes, it can, but it's more complex than it sounds. So let's dive into the comparison about what ChatGPT is, which I gave a brief overview, and embedded software activities. First one, the design. Can ChatGPT actually replace entirely the human being, the embedded software developer in the designing part? Well, not exactly, because it depends on your input. Because as I said, it's like an intelligence chat, so you need to give him an input so it can give you an output. So if you don't give him any input, it cannot give you the design by yourself. But if you fill him with the requirements in a good project context about everything you want to do, the behavior you are expecting, maybe he will give you your expected output. But it is not always possible. To explain it briefly, if you give it a really good context, explain it in a really specific way with the really specific project requirement, then he might give you a useful help. But usually it really helps you design your project. For the software implementation, it is the part where ChatGPT is the most useful for, because it is really good at giving code snippets to help you solve your project, your problem, or some specific code problem you're having. It can analyze your code, it can debug your code if you provide him a code snippet so he can analyze and debug for you. I'm already skipping steps, but anyway, I'm on the debug part. But anyway, he can indeed provide you some really code snippet and really good programming stuff. But however, pay attention, because you have a limit of the size of the prompt you can enter and fill ChatGPT. Well, I don't know about the ChatGPT 4 if there is limit about prompt size you give him. If you know this, please tell me in the comments. But for the previous versions of ChatGPT, you have a certain amount of input you can provide him, and likewise for the output it can provide you, there is also a limited amount of characters that can give you as an answer. So if you require him a really big code software, he might, for example, give you only half of the software because it's too big, or it might not give you the response, the answer you are expecting. For test part, ChatGPT also can be very useful for you, because usually when you're going to write tests for unit testing, integration testing, regression testing, etc., it usually makes use of test scripts, and ChatGPT can write those test scripts or even improve those test scripts to automatize even more your tasks, etc. For the test part, it is nothing to comment, because it is really useful. It can help on the end-to-end activity of those tasks. And for the debug part, here where things get complicated, because I explained to you before, there is the software part where you can find a bug, and there is a hardware part where you can also find a bug. For the software part, he can really help you find your bug. If you provide the specific part of your code that is not working, if you find where the crashes occurs, you cannot provide all the logs because they are really extensive, they are really big, so ChatGPT cannot handle this such a big log, so you need to analyze by yourself, or you can use ChatGPT to program some data analyze code that can analyze your log for you. I made this myself. But anyway, when it comes to hardware where you need physical intervention, that's where ChatGPT becomes pretty much useless. That's where ChatGPT becomes really useless, unfortunately, because ChatGPT does not have arms to branch cables to analyze oscilloscopes. So ChatGPT has not any physical part. So we need to wait until some robot fusionate with ChatGPT so he can provide physical intervention to help us on the hardware part. So for now, the hardware part is up to you. I don't know how is the future, so for now, unfortunately, hardware is not a good option. But anyway, so that's the overview about how ChatGPT can help embedded software engineers with the design. From these facts that I just provided to you, we can came to the conclusion that now, today, ChatGPT can't replace embedded software developers, because as you might have seen, even if it can be really useful in most of the parts, it can provide really good help, it cannot entirely replace you, because there is lots of things you still need to do. Because one of the things, for example, is still a system that depends on an input that gives an output, so it does not have autonomy to work on itself without human intervention. But there is more problems. It's just about these 4 pillars that cannot 100% intervene for you. Also, there are 2 main problems that I want to talk about. That is a challenge today with ChatGPT. So, as I briefly explained to you, ChatGPT is a really powerful and useful tool. I do not deny that. But to create some personal stuff, to create some production stuff, it's still a challenge. It's really, really hard to create production applications using ChatGPT. And there is an article I leave in the description that explains way more details about this. But what happens is, the first thing is the human language is ambiguous. This is the nature of the human language. And this can be quite challenging for large language models like ChatGPT, because there is 2 sides. One, the input we give him, because our interpretation of something you request him to do is not exactly how it will interpret. For example, if I say do this, but if this phrase that I request him to do that is not really specific, that he might interpret in other way that is not what I exactly expect. You know what I mean? I hope you do. And you have also the other side, which is the output ChatGPT gives to you, because he might not give you the answer you are expecting due to the previous problem I just mentioned before. The second problem is the ChatGPT actually is in public API. You know better than me that ChatGPT is a public API, which means that if you work in a company that has sensitive data, so it's not a good idea to share this sensitive data with a public API, because you don't know what ChatGPT can do with this kind of information. So to give an example, there are companies where the use of ChatGPT is forbidden, simply because of this public database and this possible share of sensitive data. And maybe you might have heard about the Samsung case, where some employees shared some sensitive data with ChatGPT to correct some code snippet, and it's now, this sensitive information is now in the public database of ChatGPT. So there is sensitive information in a public database. So you might imagine the consequences of this kind of problems. That's all for the video. I think this video is becoming too long, so I'll leave my opinion on the next video. And what do you think about this? Please leave the comments below. Do you think ChatGPT is close or it's far from replacing developers? Do you think in 10 years that will be already being replaced or not? So give me your insights. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.